Her husband forgot to turn off the phone, and she overheard him telling her best friend, "Baby, as soon as I get $100 million from my father-in-law, I'll divorce my wife." She was even more shocked when she found out the friend was pregnant. She called her dad and said, "Dad, ruin him. Hi, my beautiful family. Welcome back to Mr. Peter Stories, your own family story channel. May the Almighty surround you with peace that heals every wound and strength that never bends. I pray especially for every woman in this family. May your courage be renewed, your health protected, and your sacrifices honored in ways words cannot measure. You are the heartbeat of homes, the quiet strength behind every victory, the love that holds generations together. May respect follow you wherever you go, and may your kindness return to you multiplied. May your days be guided by hope, your nights wrapped in calm, and your families covered with unity and joy. When life feels heavy, may you be lifted. When the road feels long, may you be carried by grace. My prayers walk with you, always. If your heart is true, like the video. If your love is real, write, "I am with Mr. Peter." Candace Talley discovered her husband's betrayal the way her father had taught her to discover all-important truths, through numbers that didn't add up. She'd been reconciling their quarterly tax estimates on a Tuesday evening in March, a task Ronald usually handled but had been too swamped to complete for 6 months. Their accountant needed the documentation by Friday, so Candace, with her Wharton MBA and 8 years of watching her father build a billion-dollar empire, sat down to do it herself. The discrepancy appeared on page 3 of their joint business account statement, a recurring charge of $3,200, withdrawn on the 15th of every month for the past 22 months. The description read, "Property Management RPM Services." Candace frowned. They owned their home outright. They had no rental properties. She'd never heard of RPM Services. She opened her laptop and traced the payment through their banking portal. The funds went to an account registered to Premium Residential Properties, a luxury apartment management company in the city's Riverside district. High-rises with doorman, rooftop pools, and annual rents that started at 6 figures. Ronald had been paying someone's rent for almost 2 years, $70,000. Her husband was a financial consultant with a respectable practice. They lived comfortably, but not extravagantly. Last fall, he told her they needed to postpone starting a family because the business is going through a rough patch. He'd suggested they cut back on expenses, maybe sell the vacation condo in Vale. She'd agreed immediately, even reduced her charitable commitments to save money, all while he paid $3,200 monthly for an apartment she knew nothing about. Candace pulled up the property management website and navigated to their tenant directory, publicly searchable for community safety purposes. She typed in the address tied to the payment account. Unit 2847, Lessee, P. Bondi. The name hit her like a physical blow. Pamela Bondi, her college roommate, her maid of honor, the woman who'd held her hand through her mother's funeral 3 years ago and told her she was the strongest person she knew. 6 months ago, Pamela had shown up at Candace's door in tears, devastated by a horrible breakup with a boyfriend she wouldn't name. She'd needed help finding a new apartment, somewhere safe to start over. Candace had spent 3 weekends helping her search, had celebrated with champagne when Pamela found the perfect place, had helped her move boxes and hang curtains. Ronald had been unusually busy those weekends, too many client meetings to help with the move, because he was already paying for the apartment, had been paying for it for 16 months before Pamela's supposed breakup. Candace closed the laptop and sat in the perfect silence of her kitchen, the house she'd decorated, the marriage she'd believed in, the friends she'd trusted, all of it a carefully constructed lie. She didn't cry. Her father had taught her that tears were for after the battle, not during it. Right now she needed strategy. She reopened the laptop and began a systematic audit. If Ronald had hidden this, what else was he hiding? The search took her 3 days. She worked while Ronald was at his office, restoring everything to its original state before he came home. She smiled over dinner. made love to him when he initiated, played the role of the trusting wife while documenting every deception she found. The evidence mounted. A credit card in Ronald's name that she'd never seen, with charges dating back 3 years. Jewelry stores, expensive restaurants where they'd never eaten together, weekend hotels in wine country, spa packages, 3 business conferences that Ronald had attended over the past year. Candace called each venue. None had hosted any financial services conference on the dates he'd claimed. A PayPal account linked to his phone number with monthly transfers of $500 to an account labeled PB, starting 3 years ago. Most damning, text messages. Ronald thought their iPad was hers exclusively, but his iCloud account was still linked to it. Every text from his phone appeared on the iPad if she checked the Messages app. She found conversations with Pamela going back 2.5 years. "Can't wait to see you tonight. The thing we discussed. I'm working on the timeline. Another year, maybe 18 months. I need to wait for the right moment. She trusts me completely. It won't be difficult. When Greg has his next health issue, that's our window." That last message made Candace's blood run cold. Greg, her father. Ronald had been discussing her father's health with his mistress. She scrolled back further and found more. "The emergency fund is real. I confirmed it with Harrison during the estate planning review. 100 million, accessible during family crisis. The prenup doesn't cover inheritance or emergency distributions. We just need the right crisis, a legitimate one that triggers the release." Candace sat back, her mind racing. Ronald wasn't just having an affair. He was planning to steal from her family. He'd been planning it for years, waiting for an opportunity to access her father's emergency fund. The fund was real. Greg had established it 8 years ago, shortly after she'd gotten engaged. He'd said it was insurance in case her marriage ever faced genuine financial catastrophe. She'd signed the paperwork without reading it carefully. It was her father's gift, his way of protecting her. She'd trusted it was exactly what he said. Apparently so had Ronald. Except he'd seen it as an opportunity, not protection. She took screenshots of everything, backed them up to 3 separate cloud accounts Ronald didn't know existed. One under her maiden name, one under her mother's maiden name, one under a completely fabricated identity. She downloaded bank statements, credit card records, property documents, everything that proved 22 months of systematic deception. Then she called her father's private line. It was 11 p.m., but Greg Talley answered on the second ring. "Candace, what's wrong?" "Daddy, I need to come to the ranch tomorrow, and I need you to tell me the exact truth about that emergency fund in your estate planning, the one Ronald keeps asking about." Silence. Then, "What did you find?" "Everything. The affair with Pamela, the hidden expenses, the planning. He's been positioning himself to steal from you, from us. I need to know what that fund really is." Her father's voice changed, became harder. "How much evidence do you have?" "Enough to bury him in divorce court. But I think there's more. I think he's planning something bigger, and I need to understand what I'm dealing with. Come to the ranch, first thing tomorrow. And Candace, don't let him know you suspect anything. Not yet." "I won't." "Good. Because if he's planning what I think he's planning, we're going to need to be very careful about how we respond." Candace hung up and looked around her kitchen. Everything looked the same. The coffee maker she'd bought last year, the photographs on the refrigerator, the shopping list in Ronald's handwriting stuck to the fridge with a magnet from their honeymoon in Italy. But nothing was the same. Her marriage was a fraud. Her best friend was a betrayer, and her husband was plotting to steal $100 million from her family. She heard Ronald's car in the driveway. He was home from his client dinner, probably another lie, probably another evening with Pamela. Candace took a breath, practiced her smile in the reflection of the microwave, and prepared to play the role of her lifetime, the unsuspecting wife who trusted completely. Because that's what Ronald expected. That's what he'd counted on for years. He had no idea that his trusting wife was Greg Talley's daughter in every way that mattered, and Greg Talley hadn't built a billion-dollar empire by letting people steal from him. Ronald walked in smiling, kissed her forehead, asked about her day. She smiled back, told him about the book club meeting she'd attended, true, and the charity committee call she'd been on, also true. She asked about his dinner, and he spun an elaborate story about a difficult client and complex portfolio adjustments. Every word a lie, every smile a manipulation. Candace nodded and listened and played her part, but inside she was already calculating, already strategizing, already planning how to turn his scheme against him. Tomorrow she'd drive to her father's ranch. Tomorrow she'd learn what that emergency fund really was. Tomorrow she'd begin building the trap that would catch Ronald in his own greed. But tonight she'd be the perfect wife. The trusting woman he thought he'd married. The woman he'd been foolish enough to underestimate. Chapter 2. The Inheritance. The Montana sunrise turned Greg Talley's ranch into something from a western. Golden light across endless horse pastures, mountains rising in the distance, the kind of raw beauty that reminded people how small their problems were in the grand scheme of things. Except Candace's problems weren't small. They were $100 million large. She'd driven up from the city in darkness, arriving at the ranch at dawn. Her father was already awake, waiting on the porch with coffee and the set expression of a man preparing for war. Harrison Webb's car pulled up 10 minutes later. He'd driven from the city too, arriving with a leather briefcase and documents that would explain everything. They gathered in Greg's study, leather furniture, mounted elk heads, bookshelves filled with first editions and petroleum geology texts. This was where her father had built his empire, making deals on a satellite phone before the internet existed, turning drilling leases into fortunes. "Show her," Greg said simply. Webb spread documents across the massive oak desk. 8 years ago, when you got engaged, your father came to me with concerns about Ronald. Nothing concrete, just instinct based on questions Ronald asked about your family's money before he asked about wedding details. "I didn't say anything to you," Greg interjected, "because you loved him, or thought you did, and I couldn't prove my gut feeling, but I could prepare for it." Webb continued, "We created what I call a strategic trust trap. The emergency fund is real, $100 million, held in an irrevocable trust, but it has very specific release mechanisms designed to catch anyone trying to exploit it." He pulled out the trust documents, pointing to key clauses. First, the money can only be released if you make a formal written request documenting a genuine family or marriage crisis. Second, your father, or a designated trustee if he's incapacitated, must approve the request. Third, and this is critical, every dollar carries embedded forensic tracking. Candace leaned forward. "What kind of tracking?" "Digital watermarking in wire transfer protocols. Every transaction is reported to a third-party forensic accounting firm we hired specifically for this purpose. We partnered with specialists from the Treasury Department's Financial Crimes Division to design it. Completely legal, completely undetectable to the recipient. So if Ronald somehow gets access to this money, we know every account it touches, every transaction, every attempt to move it offshore or convert it. The money is essentially radioactive. It looks normal to him, but we can trace every penny." Webb smiled. "And here's the beautiful part. The trust includes automatic fraud triggers. If the money is used for purposes other than what's documented in the release request, we can immediately file for asset recovery and criminal prosecution." Greg pulled out another document. "The trust is also structured so it never becomes marital property. It's a parental gift with restrictions, not an inheritance. Your prenup can't touch it. But if Ronald fraudulently obtains it through deception, he's committed federal wire fraud. Prison time, asset forfeiture, the whole package." Candace sat back, processing. "You've been planning this for 8 years." "I've been preparing for this possibility," her father corrected. "I hoped I was wrong about Ronald, but hope isn't strategy, sweetheart. Strategy is having a plan for every scenario, including the worst ones." Webb laid out more documents. "The trust also protects you. If you're coerced or manipulated into requesting funds, the release can be reversed and all parties investigated. It's designed to catch predators without punishing victims." "So what you're saying is, We can let him create his crisis, Greg said. Let him convince you to request the money. We approve it, track where it goes, document his fraud, and then prosecute. We give him exactly enough rope to hang himself. Candace thought about the text messages she'd found, about Ronald discussing the right crisis with Pamela, about waiting for opportunities. He's been planning this for years, waiting for the perfect moment. Then we create that moment, Webb said. We manufacture circumstances that make him feel pressured to move now. Fear makes people sloppy, and sloppy creates prosecutable evidence. How do we make him feel pressured? Greg met her eyes. We make him think I'm dying, that his window is closing, that if he doesn't act now, he'll lose his opportunity forever. The coldness of it struck Candace. Her father was proposing to fake a health crisis to trap her husband. That's manipulative. So is stealing $100 million from your wife's family, Greg said bluntly. Candace, I need you to understand something. This isn't just about stopping Ronald. It's about making sure he never does this to anyone else. Men like him don't stop unless they're stopped completely. Unless there are consequences so severe they can't recover from them, Webb added. We also need to consider Pamela's role. Based on the messages you showed me, she's not an innocent victim here. She's a co-conspirator. She knows about the fund. She's discussing timeline and strategy. She needs to face consequences too. Candace thought about Pamela, her college roommate, her maid of honor, the woman she'd trusted for 15 years. The betrayal cut deeper than Ronald's somehow. She'd chosen Ronald, but Pamela had been family. What's the plan? She asked. Over the next 3 hours, they built it. Greg would schedule a cardiac workup, legitimate medical tests that would show legitimate concerns. At 73, there were always concerns. They'd interpret results as more serious than they were, present them to the family as a genuine health crisis. Harrison would position himself as trustee given Greg's declining health, making fund releases faster and simpler. This would signal to Ronald that the money was more accessible than before. Candace would play the worried daughter, slowly letting Ronald convince her that accessing the emergency fund was the right choice when his manufactured crisis inevitably appeared. He's going to create a business emergency, Webb predicted. Fake debts, fake creditors, a manufactured financial catastrophe that only the trust fund can solve. We'll let him build that lie, document every false statement, and then use it against him in federal court. How long will this take? Candace asked. Weeks, maybe 2 months. Depends on how patient he is. Greg looked at his daughter seriously. Candace, you need to understand what you're signing up for. You're going to watch your husband lie to you, watch him manipulate you, watch him think he's winning while you pretend to be fooled. Can you do that? She thought about the text messages, about Pamela's apartment, about 22 months of systematic deception, about the casual cruelty in discussing her father's health as an opportunity. I can do whatever it takes, she said. Good. Because there's one more thing. Greg pulled out a final document. When this is over, when we've caught him and prosecuted him and recovered every dollar, that money is yours. All 100 million. Not back in the trust, yours, to use however you want. Daddy, that's what you've earned, he interrupted. You're going to expose a criminal, protect future victims, and you're going to do it while enduring pain I can't fully understand. You deserve compensation for that, and I want you to use it for something meaningful, something that helps other women who've been where you are. Candace felt tears prick her eyes for the first time since she'd discovered Ronald's betrayal. What if this doesn't work? What if he suspects? Then we regroup. But honey, I've been watching Ronald for 8 years. I've seen how he looks at money, how he reacts when wealth is discussed. He's going to take this bait. The only question is how greedy he gets. Webb packed up the documents. I'll start the process today. Medical appointments for Greg, trustee designation paperwork, surveillance recommendations. Candace, I'm also going to connect you with a private investigation firm. They'll help document Ronald's movements, verify the affair, and track any additional financial impropriety. How much will this cost? Nothing you need to worry about, Greg said. This is my investment in making sure my daughter's protected and a predator faces consequences. Money well spent. Candace stood, walked to the window overlooking the ranch. Horses grazed peacefully in the morning sun. Everything looked calm, beautiful, untouched by the ugliness of betrayal and fraud. "When do we start?" she asked. "Today," her father said. "I'll schedule the cardiac tests for next week. Harrison will prepare the trust modifications, and you go home and be the perfect wife, the woman Ronald thinks he married." The woman he underestimated. Greg smiled, and it was the smile of a man who'd built an empire by being smarter than everyone else. "That's my girl." Candace drove back to the city with a plan, a purpose, and a cold determination that surprised her. She'd thought she'd feel guilty about the deception, about setting a trap for her husband. But she didn't. She felt powerful. Ronald had been playing a long game, thinking he was the only player. He had no idea the board had been rigged against him from the beginning. That the money he wanted came with tripwires and traps. That the trusting wife he'd manipulated was actually a strategist in her own right. By the time she pulled into her driveway, Candace had transformed. The devastated wife who'd discovered betrayal was gone. In her place was someone harder, smarter, more dangerous. Someone who knew exactly how to give Ronald everything he wanted right before taking everything he had. Chapter 3. The Crisis. Greg Talley's cardiac event happened on a Wednesday afternoon, precisely as planned. He'd been in a meeting with his executive team when he grabbed his chest, his face going pale. His assistant called 911. The ambulance arrived in 7 minutes. The emergency room doctors took him immediately. Everything was real except the severity. The chest pain was real, triggered by a medication his cardiologist had prescribed for exactly this purpose. The EKG abnormalities were real. Every 73-year-old heart shows some irregularities. Even the ambulance ride was real. The difference was in interpretation. Dr. Marcus Chen, Greg's longtime cardiologist and a man who owed him multiple favors, reviewed the results with appropriate gravity. "Mr. Talley, I'm concerned about what I'm seeing. Your ejection fraction is lower than previous tests, and there's evidence of arterial blockage that warrants immediate attention." "How bad?" Greg asked from his hospital bed. "Bad enough that we need to discuss surgical options and lifestyle modifications. At your age, with these indicators, we're looking at significant intervention." Dr. Chen paused. "We also need to have frank conversations about worst-case scenarios and estate planning." The hospital admitted Greg for observation. Candace received the call at 3 p.m. and arrived within the hour, her face appropriately pale. Ronald came straight from his office, still wearing his suit, looking genuinely concerned. "How is he?" Ronald asked, pulling Candace into a hug. "They don't know yet. They're running more tests. Dr. Chen mentioned surgery, talked about his age, about—" Her voice cracked convincingly. "I can't lose him, Ronald. You won't. Your father's tough. He'll get through this." They were allowed brief visits. Ronald went first, and Candace watched through the window as her husband sat beside her father's bed. She couldn't hear the conversation, but she saw Ronald's face, concern mixed with something else. Calculation. When it was her turn, Greg waited until the door closed before speaking in a voice much stronger than before. He asked about the estate planning, specifically about emergency fund accessibility given my condition. I told him Harrison Webb has all the details, that everything's been updated to account for health contingencies. Did he seem suspicious? No. Eager. He's thinking about timelines, sweetheart. This is his opportunity and he knows it. Over the next 3 days, while Greg remained hospitalized for observation, Candace watched Ronald's behavior shift subtly. He became more attentive, bringing her coffee, handling hospital logistics, making calls to coordinate her father's care. The perfect supportive husband. But she also noticed him taking phone calls in his car, spending long hours on his laptop, researching something with focused intensity. The security cameras she'd had professionally installed, legal since she co-owned the house, caught some of it. Ronald in his study late at night, spreadsheets open, calculator clicking. phone calls in low tones where she heard words like timeline and window and assets. She backed everything up and sent copies to Webb. On day 4, Dr. Chen held a family conference. Harrison Webb attended, ostensibly for estate planning purposes. "Mr. Talley's condition is stable but concerning," Dr. Chen said carefully. "The blockages are significant. I'm recommending cardiac catheterization to evaluate for possible bypass surgery. At his age, this carries risks: stroke, cardiac complications, anesthesia issues. We're looking at maybe 15 to 20% serious complication rate." "What's the timeline?" Ronald asked. "We'd like to do the procedure within the next 2 weeks. Sooner is better given the severity of the blockages." Webb interjected smoothly. "Given these circumstances, Mr. Talley, we should probably expedite the estate planning review. Make sure everything's in order before the surgery." "Agreed," Greg said weakly from his bed. "Harrison, can you gather everyone? Beneficiaries, trustees, key executives. I want to review everything while I'm still clear-headed. I can schedule it for Monday at my office if you're released by then." "Do it." That evening, in the hospital parking lot, Ronald pulled Candace aside. His face was grave, troubled. "Candace, I need to tell you something I should have mentioned before." Here it comes, she thought. The manufactured crisis. "What's wrong?" "My business. I've been having financial difficulties. Some investments that should have been solid went bad, and I'm facing significant losses." Candace let shock register on her face. "How significant?" "Potentially catastrophic. I could lose the practice, maybe even face bankruptcy." He looked away, playing shame perfectly. "I didn't want to burden you, especially with your father's health. But if the business fails while he's having surgery, while you're dealing with his recovery, I don't know how we'd manage." "How much money are we talking about?" Ronald hesitated convincingly. 40 million. Maybe more when the interest and penalties compound. I took risks trying to grow the practice and they backfired. I've been trying to fix it quietly, but I'm out of options. 40 million, almost half the trust fund, leaving room for a second crisis, a second request, exactly as her father had predicted. "Can we declare bankruptcy? Protect some assets?" "We could, but it would destroy everything I've built. Our reputation, our credit, any future in financial services." He met her eyes. "There is another option. The emergency fund your father set up. That's exactly what it's designed for. Family financial crises." "Ronald, I can't ask Daddy for that money. Not now. Not when he might be dying." "I know it feels wrong. But think about it. If the fund exists to protect our marriage during crises, this is the crisis. And if we don't use it, we could lose everything anyway. Your father would want you secure." Candace let herself be convinced slowly, over several conversations, expressing doubts and suggesting alternatives. She played the reluctant wife who eventually, painfully, agreed that accessing the fund was the only solution. Webb documented every conversation. The cameras caught Ronald's planning sessions. The private investigator, Sarah Chen, photographed him meeting with Pamela at a coffee shop, their heads close together, discussing something that made them both smile. Greg was discharged on day 6 with orders to rest before his catheterization. The procedure was scheduled for 2 weeks out. Monday morning, they gathered at Webb's office for the estate planning review. Greg looked appropriately frail, though Candace knew he'd been working on ranch business from his hospital bed. Webb presented the trust documents with professional efficiency. "Given Mr. Talley's health situation, he's designated me as interim trustee for the Family Emergency Fund. This allows for faster approval of legitimate crisis requests without requiring court proceedings." He explained the fund mechanics, how Candace could request releases, how approval worked, how quickly funds could be transferred. "Current balance is $100 million, Webb stated, accessible for documented family or marriage crises requiring immediate financial resources. Ronald's attention was laser-focused. How quickly can funds be released once approved? 72 hours from request approval, direct wire transfer to designated accounts. Candace had her request letter prepared, worked out with Webb to be detailed enough to satisfy requirements while leaving room for Ronald's inevitable lies. Greg signed the approval form with a shaking hand. $50 million, released to accounts designated by Candace and Ronald Hayes, for the purpose of resolving critical business debts threatening family financial stability. Done, Webb said. Funds will transfer Wednesday morning. Ronald squeezed Candace's hand. Thank you, both of you. I know this isn't easy, but I promise I'll rebuild. We're going to be fine. Greg looked at his son-in-law with clouded eyes that were actually sharp as knives. Just take care of my daughter. That's all I ask. Always, Ronald said. Wednesday morning at 9:47 a.m., $50 million moved from the Talley Family Trust to accounts controlled by Ronald and Candace. By 11:30 a.m., $18 million had moved to offshore accounts in the Cayman Islands. By 2 p.m., another $12 million had been transferred to shell companies purchasing Dubai real estate. By end of business, $35 million of the $50 million was hidden in international accounts, real estate holdings, and carefully structured financial instruments designed to be untraceable, except they weren't untraceable. The forensic tracking software documented every transaction, every account, every attempt to hide the money. In Webb's office, Candace watched the money flow across monitoring screens, each movement building the federal case that would destroy Ronald. He's not even being careful, Webb observed. He thinks offshore accounts are still safe havens. He has no idea that modern financial tracking makes this almost trivially easy to follow. How long before we have enough for criminal charges? We already have enough. Wire fraud, bank fraud, false documentation. But I recommend waiting. Let him commit fully to the course. Let him make it impossible to claim misunderstanding. Greg, looking considerably healthier away from Ronald's observation, nodded. Give him 2 weeks. Let him think he succeeded. Let him get comfortable. That's when people make their worst mistakes. What kind of mistakes? Candace asked. Her father smiled coldly. The kind that make absolutely certain there's no possibility of sympathy. No chance of a lenient judge. No way to claim he was just trying to save his marriage. We're going to let him show everyone exactly who he is, and then we're going to make sure he pays for every lie. Chapter 4. The Second Bite. 2 weeks after the first wire transfer, Ronald came to Candace with fresh concern carved into his face. We need to talk, he said one evening after dinner, about the business situation. Candace looked up from her book, letting appropriate worry show. What's wrong? I thought the $50 million solved the problem. It did, mostly. But there are complications I didn't fully understand when we made the request. He sat beside her, taking her hands. Some of the debts had penalty clauses I miscalculated. The creditors are demanding additional payments I didn't account for, and there's interest compounding faster than projected. How much more do you need? Ronald hesitated, playing reluctance perfectly. Another $40 million. I know it sounds insane. I know it's almost depleting the entire fund. But Candace, this would solve everything completely. Every debt cleared, every obligation met. We'd be free and clear, ready to start fresh. Ronald, that's the rest of the emergency fund. If something else happens, nothing else will happen. I promise, this closes every problem permanently. He squeezed her hands. Your father set up that fund for exactly this purpose, to protect our marriage during crisis. This is the crisis. Once it's resolved, we can focus on his recovery, on our future, maybe even starting that family we've talked about. Candace expressed doubt, suggested alternatives, made him work for her agreement. But eventually, carefully, she relented. But I need you to promise me this is the last time, that you're being completely honest about the debts. I can't go through this uncertainty again. I promise, Ronald said, looking into her eyes with absolute sincerity. Everything I'm telling you is true. This fixes everything. I love you. I would never lie about something this important. The recording was damning. Candace had been wearing a discreet recording device Sarah Chen had provided, completely legal since she was a party to the conversation in her own home. She filed the second trust fund request. Webb, as trustee, expressed appropriate concern about depleting the fund, but ultimately approved based on Candace's sworn documentation that the crisis was genuine. $40 million transferred to Ronald's accounts and immediately began flowing offshore. This time Ronald was even less cautious. 28 million moved to Dubai accounts within hours. Another 8 million went to shell companies in the Cayman Islands. 2 million purchased a yacht, the same model, Candace noted with grim humor, that Ronald had been photographed admiring in marina catalogues. He also booked flights, one-way tickets to Dubai, first class, departure date November 15th, 2 weeks away. Only one ticket had been purchased, not two. "He's not taking Pamela," Sarah Chen reported during a surveillance briefing. "He's taking the money and running alone, abandoning everyone. You, Pamela, his entire life." "What about Pamela?" Candace asked. "Does she know?" "I don't think so. I've been monitoring her apartment. She's been shopping for furniture, showing friends paint samples for their new place in Dubai. She thinks they're going together. She has no idea he's planning to disappear without her." Candace felt something like pity for Pamela, quickly followed by cold satisfaction. Her former friend was being betrayed by the same man, in the same way. There was justice in that. "When do we move?" she asked Webb. "Now, before he gets on that plane. We have overwhelming evidence. $90 million stolen through fraud, systematic concealment, false documentation. The U.S. Attorney's Office is ready to file charges immediately." Greg, his heart condition miraculously improved now that Ronald wasn't watching, made the call himself. "I want him arrested at home, early morning before he can destroy evidence or flee, and I want cameras there. I want documentation of everything." Webb nodded. "FBI's Financial Crimes Division will execute the arrest. They've been briefed on the entire case. And Candace, they want you to be present when it happens. As the primary victim, your testimony about his deception will be critical." "Will I have to face him?" "Not directly during the arrest. You can wait in a separate room while they take him into custody. But yes, eventually you'll need to face him in court, at depositions, probably multiple times. Can you do that?" Candace thought about the text messages discussing her father's health as an opportunity, about the $90 million stolen through lies, about Pamela's apartment and the yacht and the one-way ticket that abandoned everyone. "I can do whatever it takes to make sure he pays for this. Then we move tomorrow morning." That night, Candace lay awake beside Ronald one final time. He slept peacefully, probably dreaming of Dubai, of his new life, of the fortune he thought he'd stolen successfully. He had no idea that in 7 hours his world would end. Chapter 5. The Arrest. The FBI arrived at 6:45 a.m. Candace was already awake, dressed, sitting in the kitchen with coffee and her phone. She'd barely slept, running through scenarios, preparing herself emotionally for what was about to happen. Ronald was in the shower when they knocked, firm, professional, the kind of knock that communicated authority without aggression. Candace opened the door to find 4 federal agents in suits and a U.S. Marshal. "Mrs. Hayes, I'm Special Agent Lisa Warren, FBI Financial Crimes Division. We have a warrant for Ronald Hayes's arrest and a warrant to search these premises. May we come in?" Candace stepped aside wordlessly. The agents entered with practiced efficiency. 2 stayed with her, 2 went upstairs to retrieve Ronald, 1 began documenting the house. She heard Ronald's surprised shout, the sound of quick movement, then footsteps on the stairs. He emerged in jeans and a t-shirt, wet hair, handcuffed, his face a study in shocked comprehension. His eyes found Candace. "You did this." "Ronald Hayes," Agent Warren said formally, "you're under arrest for wire fraud, bank fraud, conspiracy to commit theft, and interstate transportation of stolen funds. You have the right to remain silent." Ronald wasn't listening. He was staring at Candace with an expression that cycled through disbelief, betrayal, and finally rage. "The heart attack, your father, all of it was a setup." "Get dressed," Agent Warren instructed. "You're being taken into federal custody." While Ronald was escorted upstairs to dress under supervision, Agent Warren sat with Candace. We'll need your formal statement, but I wanted to tell you this is one of the most comprehensively documented fraud cases I've seen. The embedded tracking, the recorded conversations, the systematic documentation. You built a prosecutor's dream case. My father built it, Candace corrected, 8 years ago. He knew. Knew what? That Ronald married me for money. That eventually he'd try to take it. Dad just made sure that when Ronald stole, we'd have proof. Ronald emerged 10 minutes later, fully dressed, still handcuffed. As agents led him toward the door, he turned back to Candace. How long have you known? Long enough. The business debts were fake. We know. We've known everything from the beginning. His face crumbled. Please, whatever you think I did, we can fix this. We can talk. Don't do this. I'm not doing anything, Ronald. The FBI is doing their job. The US attorney is doing their job. You did this to yourself when you stole $90 million and planned to flee the country. It wasn't like that. It was exactly like that. Candace's voice was ice. You manipulated me into requesting funds under completely false pretenses. You moved the money offshore within hours. You purchased real estate in Dubai. You booked a one-way flight. You did all of that. Not me. You. Agent Warren interrupted. Mr. Hayes, you'll have the opportunity to make statements to your attorney. Right now, we need to process you into federal detention. They took him away. Candace watched through the window as they put him in an unmarked vehicle and drove off. Neighbors were starting to emerge, watching the spectacle, already pulling out phones. Let them watch, she thought. Let everyone see what happens when you underestimate a tally. The search of her house took 4 hours. Agents photographed Ronald's study, seized computers and files, documented everything that might serve as evidence. They were professional, methodical, and surprisingly respectful. We know you're a victim here, one agent told her. We're just gathering everything we need to make sure the case is airtight. By noon, they were finished. Candace was alone in her house. Technically their house, but it had never really been theirs. It had been a stage set for Ronald's performance as devoted husband. Her phone rang. Webb. Ronald's been processed and detained. Bail hearing is at 3 p.m. U.S. attorney is recommending denial based on flight risk. They found the Dubai ticket and the yacht purchase. Will he get bail? Unlikely. Federal judges don't like defendants with one-way international tickets and $90 million in offshore accounts. He'll probably stay in detention until trial. Good. Candace, there's something else. The U.S. attorney wants to hold a press conference tomorrow. Make this case public. Given the amount stolen and the systematic nature of the fraud, they want to send a message about financial exploitation in marriage. Do I have to be there? They'd prefer it, but only if you're comfortable. This will be very public, very permanent. Once you speak about this publicly, there's no going back to privacy. Candace thought about it, about the women she'd read about in news stories, victims of financial fraud who stayed silent, who felt ashamed, who carried the burden of someone else's crime, about how silence protected predators. I'll do it. I'll tell everything, because maybe some other woman will see the warning signs in her own marriage and act before it's too late. The bail hearing was exactly what Webb predicted. The prosecutor presented evidence of flight risk so overwhelming. The Dubai ticket, the $90 million in offshore accounts, the yacht purchase, the fake business crisis, that the defense attorney barely argued. The judge denied bail, calling Ronald a textbook flight risk with means and motive to flee jurisdiction. Ronald was remanded to federal detention until trial. That night, Candace stood in her house now, legally and emotionally, and allowed herself to feel what she'd been suppressing for weeks. Not grief exactly, something more complex. Relief mixed with exhaustion, mixed with cold satisfaction. She'd won. Ronald was in custody. The money would be recovered. Justice was happening, but the cost felt heavy. 8 years of marriage revealed as performance. A friendship destroyed. Trust in people fundamentally altered. She called her father. It's done. He's in custody. How do you feel? Empty, tired, angry, satisfied, all of it at once. Greg was quiet for a moment. That's normal. You just burned your life down to the foundation. That's not easy, even when it's necessary. But Candace, you need to remember something. You didn't destroy your marriage. Ronald did. You just held him accountable. There's a difference. I know, but it still hurts. Of course it hurts, but you'll rebuild. Stronger, smarter, more careful about who you trust. And that $90 million, you're going to use it for something meaningful, something that helps other women avoid what you went through. I've been thinking about that, Candace said. A foundation. Legal aid for victims of financial fraud in marriage, resources, education, support systems. Turn what he tried to steal into protection for others. Your mother would have loved that idea, taking the worst thing that happened and making it meaningful. They talked for another hour about logistics, plans, next steps. By the time Candace hung up, she felt steadier. Purpose was emerging from the wreckage. Tomorrow she'd face cameras and tell her story. But tonight she'd sleep in peace for the first time in weeks, knowing that Ronald Hayes would spend years in prison learning exactly what it cost to betray a woman who had resources, intelligence, and a father who taught her to fight smart. Chapter 6. The Reckoning. The morning after Ronald's arrest, Candace woke to find her face on every news channel. Local heiress's husband arrested in $90 million fraud scheme. The story was already spiraling beyond her control. Her phone had 247 missed calls, 43 voicemails. The press had found her home address. 3 news vans were parked outside. Let them wait, Greg said when he arrived at 8. We control the narrative, not them. Webb's scheduled the press conference for 2. That gives us 6 hours to prepare you for what comes next, which is you standing in front of cameras and admitting to the world that your husband never loved you, that your 8-year marriage was a performance, that your best friend betrayed you, that you were fooled. Greg's voice was gentle but firm. This is going to hurt more than the arrest, because this makes it permanent, public, real. Candace felt her stomach twist. She'd been so focused on catching Ronald, on building the case, on strategic victory. She hadn't fully processed what it would feel like to stand in front of strangers and catalogue her humiliation. I don't know if I can do this. You can. Because women need to hear from someone who survived, who didn't stay silent out of shame, and because if you don't tell the story, reporters will tell it for you. Badly. At 10 a.m., Webb arrived with an unexpected guest, Pamela's attorney, a sharp-suited woman named Catherine Ross. Ms. Bondi would like to speak with Mrs. Hayes before the press conference, Ross said without preamble. She's prepared to provide testimony against Mr. Hayes in exchange for reduced charges, but she wants to apologize to Mrs. Hayes first, privately. Absolutely not, Greg said immediately, but Candace held up a hand. Where is she? Conference room downstairs with my supervision. Candace looked at her father. I need to do this. I need to hear what she has to say. Sweetheart, you don't owe her anything. I know, but I need to see her face. I need her to see mine. Candace stood. I need her to understand exactly what she destroyed. The conference room was small, windowless, designed for difficult conversations. Pamela sat at the table looking like she'd aged a decade overnight. Her expensive clothes couldn't hide the defeat in her posture. She stood when Candace entered. Candace, sit down. Candace's voice was ice. She remained standing, claiming the power position her father had taught her. Your lawyer said you wanted to apologize, so apologize. Pamela's hands shook. I'm sorry. I know that's not enough. I know there's nothing I can say that makes this better, but I need you to know I'm sorry. You're sorry you got caught. There's a difference. No, I'm sorry I did it. I'm sorry I betrayed you. I'm sorry I helped him hurt you. Tears streamed down Pamela's face. You held my hand at my mother's funeral. You were the maid of honor at my wedding. You were my best friend for 15 years, and I destroyed that for money and a man who was lying to me too. When did it start? Candace asked. When did you decide I was worth betraying? Pamela looked down. 3 years ago, after your mother died. You inherited her estate, and Ronald started talking about the trust fund. about your father's wealth. He said your marriage was loveless, that you only stayed together for appearances. He made me believe I wasn't stealing you from him, that you didn't even want him. Did you believe that? Really? Candace leaned forward. You saw me with him. You came to our anniversary dinners. You listened to me talk about wanting to start a family. Did you actually believe our marriage was fake? I wanted to believe it. So I did. That's the truth, isn't it? You wanted my life, the money, the social position, the future I had, so you decided to take it. Pamela's face crumpled. Yes, I'm not going to lie anymore. I wanted what you had. I thought I deserved it more. I was younger, prettier, more exciting. I thought he'd chosen wrong when he married you, that I could give him what you couldn't. The honesty was somehow worse than lies would have been. Candace felt something sharp lodge in her chest. Do you know what hurts most? Candace said quietly. Not that you slept with my husband, not even that you helped him steal from my family. It's that you sat with me at my mother's funeral. You held my hand while I cried. You told me I was the strongest person you knew, and the entire time you were sleeping with my husband and planning to destroy my life. I know, I hate myself for it. You should. Candace straightened. Your lawyer said you want a deal. Testimony against Ronald for reduced charges. Yes, I'll tell them everything. Every conversation, every plan, every lie he told me about you. Why? Why betray him now? Pamela's laugh was bitter. Because he was leaving me too. I found out yesterday. The plane ticket to Dubai, just one. The penthouse, only his name. The yacht, his. He was going to take everything and leave me with nothing, just like he was leaving you. I was never special. I was just useful. Candace felt a cold satisfaction. Then testify. Tell them everything. But understand something, Pamela. I'm not doing this for you. I'm not giving you redemption or forgiveness. I'm accepting your testimony because it will help put Ronald in prison for decades. That's all. I understand. And after your testimony, after your reduced sentence, after you've served whatever minimal time you get because you cooperated, I never want to see you again. No letters, no calls, no attempts at reconciliation. You're dead to me, completely. Pamela nodded, tears falling. I understand. Good. Then tell your lawyer we'll accept her cooperation. Candace turned to leave, then stopped. One more thing. That bracelet you're wearing, the silver one with the small diamonds. I gave you that for your 30th birthday. Take it off. Candace, take it off. With shaking hands, Pamela removed the bracelet and placed it on the table. Candace picked it up, held it for a moment, then dropped it in the trash can. 15 years of friendship. That's what it was worth to you. She walked to the door. Enjoy your reduced sentence, Pamela. It's more than you deserve. In the hallway, Greg was waiting. He pulled her into a hug. You okay? No. But I will be. Candace took a breath. Let's go do the press conference. Let's make sure everyone knows what they both are. At 2 p.m., the Tally Foundation conference room held 200 reporters. Candace stood backstage, watching the cameras set up, feeling the weight of what was about to happen. Last chance to change your mind, Webb said. No, this needs to come from me. She walked to the podium. Flashbulbs exploded. The room fell silent. Thank you for coming. My name is Candace Tally Hayes. Yesterday, my husband was arrested by the FBI for stealing $90 million from my family. Today, I'm here to tell you how he did it, why I let him, and what I'm going to do to make sure other women don't suffer what I survived. Her voice was steady, stronger than she felt. She told the story methodically, the bank statement, the apartment, the manufactured crisis, the embedded tracking that caught him, the systematic betrayal by both her husband and her best friend. Some of you are wondering why I didn't see it sooner, why I trusted him. The answer is simple. I loved him, or I loved who I thought he was, and he was very, very good at being that person. She showed the financial evidence, the money trails, the Dubai escape plan, everything that proved Ronald had married her solely to access her father's wealth. My father suspected Ronald's motives 8 years ago, but he couldn't stop me from marrying someone I loved. So instead, he built a trap. He created an emergency fund designed specifically to catch someone trying to exploit it, and Ronald walked right into it. The questions came fast. Do you feel foolish for not seeing the signs? Yes, every day. But I'm learning that being trusting isn't the same as being stupid. I was betrayed by two people skilled at deception. That's on them, not me. What about Pamela Bondi? Ms. Bondi will be testifying against Ronald in exchange for reduced charges. She's made her choice. I hope the testimony helps put him away for decades. Will you forgive them? Candace paused. This was the question that mattered. I don't know. Right now I'm focused on making sure this never happens to anyone else. Forgiveness can wait. After an hour, Webb ended it. That's all. Thank you. As Candace left the podium, exhausted and hollow, a reporter shouted, Mrs. Hayes, do you still love your husband? She turned back and for a moment let the mask slip. Let them see the pain underneath. I loved the person I thought he was. That person never existed. What I feel now is grief for the time wasted and determination to make sure he faces every consequence he's earned. The press conference was national news within hours. But Candace didn't watch the coverage. She drove to the site where the foundation would be built and sat alone in her car, finally letting herself feel everything she'd held back. The humiliation of public exposure, the grief of 8 wasted years, the rage at being made a fool, the shame of not seeing it sooner. She cried for an hour, hard, ugly sobs that shook her whole body. Then she dried her eyes, fixed her makeup, and called her father. It's done, she said. Everyone knows. How do you feel? Empty, but also free. Like I can finally start rebuilding now that the worst is public. That's exactly right. You controlled the story. You told the truth on your terms. And tomorrow, we start building something that makes sure Ronald's worst act becomes your greatest achievement. The foundation. The foundation. But tonight, you rest. You've earned it. That night, alone in her house, Candace received a message from the FBI. Ronald had been informed about the press conference. His reaction, according to the agent, was to sit in his cell staring at the wall for 3 hours without speaking. Good, Candace thought. Let him understand what it feels like when your life becomes public spectacle, when everyone knows you're not who you pretended to be. She opened a bottle of wine, expensive, from the collection Ronald had been building for special occasions that never came, poured a glass, and toasted herself in the reflection of her darkened window. To survival, she said quietly, and to making sure he never does this to anyone else. The woman in the reflection looked tired but unbroken, hurt but not destroyed. She'd faced her worst fear, public humiliation, and survived it. Tomorrow, she'd start building. But tonight, she'd earned the right to simply sit in the wreckage and know she'd made it through the hardest day. Ronald was in prison. Pamela was cooperating. The money would be recovered. Justice was happening, and Candace Tally Hayes was still standing. That was enough. Chapter 7. The Foundation. The Tally Justice Initiative opened on a crisp October morning, exactly 1 year after Candace had discovered the bank statement that changed everything. The building was modest, 3 stories, modern but not ostentatious, designed to feel welcoming rather than intimidating. Inside, consultation rooms for legal aid, classrooms for financial literacy, private offices for counseling, and a resource library stocked with information about protecting assets, recognizing fraud, and rebuilding after betrayal. Candace had spent 8 months building it, hiring staff, developing programs, creating systems that would help women navigate the complex aftermath of financial abuse. The team she'd assembled was impressive. 3 family law attorneys specializing in fraud cases, 2 forensic accountants, a financial literacy coordinator, and a trauma counselor. Sarah Chen, the private investigator who'd helped document Ronald's crimes, agreed to serve on the advisory board. So did Victoria Hammond, a woman whose case had eerily paralleled Candace's and who'd used the foundation's resources to stop her own husband's fraud scheme. You ready? Greg asked as they stood in the lobby before the opening ceremony. Nervous. What if this doesn't actually help anyone? What if it's just a monument to my anger? Then you'll learn and adjust. But sweetheart, you've spent a year researching, planning, hiring the right people. This isn't a vanity project. It's a real solution to a real problem. The opening ceremony drew 200 attendees, donors, supporters, journalists, and women who'd already contacted the foundation seeking help. Candice spoke briefly. 1 year ago, I discovered systematic fraud in my marriage. The betrayal was devastating, but I had resources most women don't have. A wealthy father, access to elite lawyers, the ability to fight back effectively. Most women in similar situations have none of that. This foundation exists to level that playing field. She outlined the services: free legal consultation, forensic accounting to uncover hidden assets, financial literacy programs, emergency grants for women who needed to leave dangerous situations, referrals to therapists who understood financial abuse. We can't prevent betrayal, but we can make sure women have tools to protect themselves, resources to fight back, and support to rebuild. That's what the Tally Justice Initiative provides. The first client walked in the following Monday. Jennifer, 42, married 16 years, discovering that her husband had hidden $3 million in offshore accounts while claiming they couldn't afford their daughter's college tuition. I found bank statements in his car, Jennifer explained in a consultation room. Accounts in the Cayman Islands, money I knew nothing about. When I confronted him, he told me I was imagining things, made me feel crazy for questioning him. Candice recognized the pattern immediately: the gaslighting, the hidden assets, the manufactured confusion. You're not crazy. You're seeing exactly what's there. Let me connect you with our forensic accountant. She'll help you document everything. Then our lawyers will explain your options. Over the following months, the foundation helped 43 women. Each case was different: hidden assets, fake business debts, systematic theft from joint accounts, elaborate schemes to drain retirement funds. But the pattern was always similar: men who viewed their wives as obstacles rather than partners. Not every case was winnable. Some women had signed away too many rights. Some had waited too long to gather evidence. Some were married to men too skilled at hiding money. But even in those cases, the foundation provided support, counseling, and the crucial message: you're not alone, and this isn't your fault. 6 months after opening, something unexpected happened. The foundation received a letter from federal prison, Ronald's handwriting. Candice almost threw it away unopened, but curiosity won. Dear Candice, I know I have no right to contact you. I know my apologies mean nothing, but I wanted you to know I've been thinking about what I did, not just to you, but to everyone I hurt. I read about your foundation in a news article, about what you're doing with the money I tried to steal. I think maybe that's the only good thing that came out of any of this, that my worst act became something that helps people. I'm required to do programming here: therapy, education, classes. I've been working with the prison's financial literacy program, teaching other inmates basic money management. It's not much, but it's something. Maybe the only way I can make even a tiny bit of amends. I don't expect you to respond. I just wanted you to know that your foundation is important work. Ronald. Candice read it twice, looking for manipulation, for hidden agenda. She couldn't find it. The letter sounded genuine, broken, like someone actually facing what they'd done. She showed it to her father. What do you think? I think prison changes people. Sometimes it makes them bitter. Sometimes it makes them think. Question is whether this is real change or just the emotion of facing consequences. Should I respond? That's your call. But be careful. He's skilled at manipulation. Candice thought about it for several days before deciding. She wouldn't respond directly, but she would send a message through his prison counselor. Ronald Hayes is welcome to continue his rehabilitation programs. If he's genuine about contributing to financial literacy education, that's valuable work. But he should understand that his victims don't owe him forgiveness or acknowledgement. The work should be its own reward. The counselor reported that Ronald had accepted this message with what appeared to be relief. A year after the foundation opened, Candace was invited to speak at a conference on financial abuse in marriage. The audience was attorneys, counselors, advocates, and survivors. She told her story, abbreviated, focused on lessons rather than pain. The biggest mistake I made wasn't trusting my husband, it was not trusting myself. I noticed the discrepancies, I saw warning signs, but I convinced myself I was being paranoid. I let him gaslight me into doubting my own instincts. That's what abusers do, they make you question your reality. She outlined warning signs, financial secrecy, defensive reactions to money questions, sudden behavior changes, mysterious debts or windfalls, resistance to transparency. If you see these signs, trust yourself, investigate, document, get professional help. Don't let anyone tell you that wanting financial transparency in marriage is unreasonable. It's the minimum standard, not an excessive demand. After the speech, a woman approached. My husband told me yesterday we can't afford our mortgage anymore because of business debts, but I saw a bank statement showing transfers to accounts I don't recognize. I think I'm in your situation. Candace handed her a card. Come to the foundation tomorrow. We'll help you figure out what's really happening. The woman did come. Forensic accounting revealed hidden accounts, offshore transfers, systematic theft. With the foundation's help, she filed for divorce with complete documentation. Her husband had no defense. She recovered most of what he'd stolen and started rebuilding. That was case number 67. By year 2, it would be over 200. The foundation grew, expanded to 2 more cities, trained additional staff, developed partnerships with law schools and accounting firms, became a model that other organizations replicated. Candace's personal healing progressed more slowly. She attended therapy weekly, processing betrayal, wasted years, the reality that she'd been married to someone who'd never loved her. It was hard work, harder than building the foundation. When will I stop feeling stupid? She asked her therapist. You weren't stupid, you were trusting. There's a difference. It feels the same. It's not. Stupid would be seeing clear evidence and ignoring it. You saw subtle signs and investigated when things didn't add up. That's smart, not stupid. Slowly, Candace began to believe it. She'd been betrayed because Ronald was skilled at deception, not because she was weak. She started dating again, cautiously, with clear boundaries about financial transparency. She dated a doctor who showed her his tax returns without being asked. She dated a teacher who split every check and kept meticulous records. She dated an entrepreneur so transparent about finances, she knew his bank balance before his middle name. None became serious. But they helped her understand that not all men were predators. That trust could be rebuilt carefully with people who earned it. On the 2nd anniversary of Ronald's sentencing, the foundation held a gala. 300 attendees, raising additional funds, celebrating survivors, recognizing staff. Candace stood at the podium looking at women who'd been betrayed and survived, women still fighting their way through, women who'd turned pain into purpose. 2 years ago, I exposed my husband's fraud publicly. Today, I stand here and tell you about what came after. Because the betrayal isn't the end of the story. What comes next, that's what we control. She spoke about the foundation's growth, lives changed, systems built, but also about harder truths. Healing wasn't linear, recovery wasn't guaranteed, some days were still difficult. I still get angry sometimes. I still wonder who I'd be if I'd married someone honest, but I also know I'm stronger now than I ever was. Not because betrayal made me strong, because I chose to become strong after betrayal. That's the lesson. We don't control what happens to us. We control what we do after. After the gala, Victoria pulled Candace aside. I wanted to tell you something. I'm getting married next June, and I wanted to ask if you'd come. You helped me understand that what happened with Marcus wasn't my fault. You gave me the ability to trust again. I want you there to see it worked. Candace felt tears prick her eyes. I'd be honored. Driving home that night, Candace thought about Victoria's invitation. about the 200 women the foundation had helped, about the foundation itself, sustainable and growing. Ronald had tried to steal her future. Instead, his betrayal had become the catalyst for protecting hundreds of women. His worst act had become her best work. That felt like justice. The transformation kind. The kind that took something ugly and made it beautiful. Turned victims into survivors and survivors into advocates. She still didn't forgive Ronald. Maybe she never would. But she'd stopped letting him occupy mental space. He was in prison, working on himself or not. It didn't matter anymore. He'd become irrelevant except as the catalyst that started everything else. Candice pulled into her driveway. A new house, smaller than the one she'd shared with Ronald, but entirely hers. Every piece of furniture her choice. Every decision reflecting who she actually was. Inside, her phone buzzed. A text from her father. "Proud of you, today and always." She smiled and texted back, "Love you, Dad. See you Sunday." Then she poured wine, sat on her couch, and allowed herself to feel what 2 years had taught her. Survival was possible, strength could be built from wreckage, and the best outcome wasn't destruction. It was living well, building well, becoming someone who turned pain into purpose and betrayal into protection for others. Ronald had taught her that lesson without meaning to, and that was the only thank you he'd ever get. Chapter 8. The Pattern. 3 years after the foundation's opening, Sarah Chen brought Candice a case that made her blood run cold. "You need to see this," Sarah said, spreading documents across Candice's desk. Woman named Victoria Stevens. Married 7 years. Husband Marcus Sullivan, financial consultant. And Candice. The pattern is identical. Secret apartment, hidden offshore accounts, manufactured business crisis. He's following Ronald's playbook exactly. Candice studied the documents, feeling déjà vu. Marcus had even used similar shell company structures, the same offshore banks, comparable timelines of escalating theft. How did she find us? She read about your case, recognized warning signs in her own marriage. She's been documenting everything for 4 months. Bank statements, text messages, property records. She needs help with legal strategy. Victoria Stevens arrived, looking controlled, but barely. Candice recognized that expression. She'd worn it herself. "Thank you for seeing me," Victoria said. "I know you're busy, but I read about what happened to you and I realized I'm living the same nightmare." "Tell me everything." Victoria's story spilled out. Irregular account transfers 6 months ago. Investigation revealing a secret apartment. Discovering offshore accounts she couldn't access. Learning about a planned business expansion to Dubai. "I confronted him 3 days ago," Victoria said. "Showed him printouts of accounts I'd found. He told me I was imagining things, that I'd doctored the statements. He gaslighted me so effectively I actually doubted myself for 10 minutes. But you're not imagining it." "No, and this morning I checked our accounts. He's moved everything he can access, drained our savings, liquidated investments. He's preparing to run." Candice felt familiar cold anger. Marcus Sullivan was doing it again. The same playbook, probably learned from reading about Ronald's case and thinking he could improve on it. "How much did he take?" $8 million so far, but there's more he's trying to access. I have a trust fund from my parents, $30 million, accessible at age 40 or in case of documented financial emergency. He's been pushing me to claim emergency access." The pattern was perfect. Too perfect. "Does your husband know about my case? About this foundation?" "I don't think so." "Why?" "Because this is so similar, it's either the world's strangest coincidence or he studied Ronald's scheme deliberately." Sarah pulled up her laptop. "I ran background on Marcus Sullivan. 3 years ago, right when Ronald's case hit national news, Marcus's business started changing. He began taking on offshore clients, complex international transactions, exactly the kind of financial engineering Ronald used." "He's been preparing," Candice said, "learning from Ronald's mistakes." "Can we stop him?" Victoria asked. "Yes, but we need to move fast and be strategic." Candice called Webb immediately. "We've got another case, almost identical pattern to Ronald. The husband is already moving money." Webb arrived within an hour. He reviewed Victoria's documentation with practiced expertise. This is prosecutable, wire fraud, conspiracy, theft. But you're right about timeline. He's executing his escape plan. If he gets on a plane to Dubai, recovering assets becomes much harder. What do? We do what we did with Ronald, Candace said. We let him think he's winning. We document everything. We build an airtight case. But Victoria, your trust fund, is it protected with any kind of fraud tracking? It's a simple trust, no special protections. Then we add them. Now, today. Candace looked at Webb. Can we modify her trust structure like my father did with mine? If the trustee agrees and we move fast. Who's the trustee? My father. And he'll definitely agree. He never liked Marcus. Within hours, they'd restructured Victoria's trust with embedded tracking, adding fraud triggers, creating the same trap that caught Ronald. Here's what we do, Candace explained. Marcus will pressure you to access your trust fund. He'll have a crisis, business emergency, investment opportunity, something requiring immediate capital. You resist at first, then reluctantly agree. We release funds with tracking enabled, then we document his fraud and press charges. How long will this take? Weeks, maybe a month. But Victoria, you'll have to pretend nothing's wrong. Watch him lie. Watch him plan his escape. Can you handle that? Victoria's jaw tightened. I can handle anything if it means he pays for this. Over the next weeks, they prepared. Victoria's trust was modified. Webb coordinated with FBI financial crimes. Sarah installed monitoring equipment. They waited for Marcus to make his move. He came back 5 days later, contrite and apologetic, told Victoria he'd overreacted, that he'd been stressed, suggested a weekend away to reconnect. Victoria played her part perfectly. During the weekend, which she recorded with equipment Sarah provided, Marcus made his pitch. Business cash flow crisis, major client delayed payment, needed bridge financing from her trust fund. Just $15 million temporarily, everything would be repaid with interest. Victoria expressed concern, suggested alternatives, let him convince her over 2 days. Finally agreed. She filed the trust fund request. Her father approved it. $15 million transferred to accounts Marcus controlled, and immediately started moving. Offshore accounts, shell companies, Dubai real estate, the exact same pattern as Ronald's scheme. He really did study Ronald's case, Webb said, watching transactions on monitoring screens, but he learned the wrong lessons. He learned how to move money but not how to avoid detection. 3 weeks later, Marcus was arrested. The charges were nearly identical to Ronald's, plus identity theft for forging Victoria's signature and obstruction for attempting to delete computer records. The media coverage was intense. Second major Dubai trust fund fraud case. Financial consultant copies infamous Hayes scheme. Reporters drew direct parallels. Most disturbing, Sarah discovered Marcus had attended the same business networking group as Ronald 5 years earlier. They'd known each other. Marcus didn't just read about Ronald's case, Sarah told reporters. He knew Ronald personally. He watched Ronald's rise and fall, and he thought he could do it better. Marcus's trial moved quickly. The evidence was overwhelming. The jury convicted on all counts. Sentencing, 20 years, longer than Ronald's because he'd had the benefit of seeing exactly what happened to Ronald and chose to do it anyway. After sentencing, Victoria came to the foundation. I wanted to thank you, not just for stopping Marcus, but for showing me it was possible to fight back. When I read about your case, I realized I wasn't alone. That gave me courage to document everything instead of falling apart. What's next for you? Rebuild. Figure out who I am outside a fraudulent marriage, and volunteer here if you'll have me. Help other women the way you helped me. We'd be honored. Victoria did volunteer. Her fresh perspective helped survivors who couldn't always relate to Candace's now legendary story. But the Marcus case brought something unexpected. 3 more cases emerged over 6 months. Different details, different amounts, same basic pattern. Men in Ronald's social circles who'd seen his scheme and thought they could improve it. Ronald inspired copycats, Sarah said during a foundation board meeting. His case was so public, so detailed, that other men saw it as a template. Then we shut them down, Candace said firmly. Every single one. We document them, catch them, make consequences severe enough that the next person thinks twice. The foundation became known as the place to go when financial fraud was suspected. Every case refined their expertise, forensic accounting, legal strategies, documentation requirements. Not all ended in prosecution. Some men backed down when confronted with evidence. Some women chose quiet divorce over criminal charges. But in every case, the foundation provided support and the message that financial abuse was serious and criminal. 4 years after opening, Candace testified before Congress about financial fraud in marriage. She brought Victoria. Together, they explained patterns, tactics, warning signs, proposed legislation for mandatory financial disclosure in divorces, embedded tracking in large trust funds, stronger victim protections. Current law treats financial fraud in marriage as a civil matter, Candace told the committee. But when someone systematically steals millions through deception, that's not a civil dispute. That's a crime. We need laws reflecting that reality. The testimony led to the Financial Fraud Protection Act, passed 2 years later, making certain types of marriage financial deception automatically prosecutable as federal crimes. It was nicknamed Candace's Law. Ronald sent her a letter when he heard, "I read about the new law, about how my case helped inspire it. I'm glad. Glad that what I did, the worst thing I ever did, at least led to something that protects people. It doesn't make up for anything, but it's something. I have a parole hearing in 4 years. I'm not optimistic, but if I ever get out, I'll spend whatever life I have left preventing other men from becoming what I was." Candace filed the letter without responding. She didn't owe him anything. He'd become simply a catalyst, the spark that started the fire that became the foundation that protected thousands. His role in her story was finished. What remained was her own work, her own purpose, her own transformation from victim to survivor to advocate. And that work continued, day after day, case after case, woman after woman. The foundation persisted, grew, became a model other cities replicated. Ronald's legacy wasn't the money he tried to steal. It was the foundation that rose from his ashes and the thousands of women it would help over decades. That legacy belonged to the survivors, not to him. Chapter 9. The Transformation. 5 years into the Foundation's operation, Candace received an unusual request through web. The federal prison where Ronald was serving his sentence had contacted them. Ronald had been working with the prison's financial literacy program and wanted to expand it into a course specifically addressing financial fraud awareness. "He's asking if you'd review the curriculum," Webb said. "Make sure it's actually useful and not just image rehabilitation." Candace's instinct was to refuse, but the program coordinator sent the draft curriculum, and curiosity made her read it. It was good, surprisingly good. Ronald had built a course explaining warning signs of financial fraud, basic asset protection, how to recognize manipulation tactics. Written from the perpetrator's perspective, he explained how fraud worked because he'd done it. "Predators look for certain characteristics," one section read. "Trust without verification, emotional dependence, financial illiteracy, isolation from support systems. If you recognize these tactics being used on you, it's not love, it's exploitation." Another section detailed offshore banking tricks, shell company structures, tactics to hide money. If your partner won't explain financial decisions, won't share account passwords, becomes defensive about money, these are red flags. Not signs of privacy, signs of deception. Candace called the coordinator. "This curriculum is solid, but I need assurance this isn't just Ronald looking good for parole." "I don't think it is," the coordinator, Dr. Patricia Mills, said. "I've worked with him for 2 years. He's different than most inmates. Most deny, minimize, blame victims. Ronald does none of that. He takes full responsibility. He's almost too hard on himself." "How so?" "He calls what he did evil. Not just wrong, evil. He tells other inmates that if they've done similar things, they need to face it completely before they can change. No excuses, no justification. It's actually quite brutal. Candace felt something complicated stir, not forgiveness, but recognition that change might be possible. What do you want from me? Come to the prison, speak to his class, tell your story from the victim's perspective. Let inmates hear what it's like on the receiving end. You want me to voluntarily go to prison and face Ronald? I want you to help prevent future Ronalds. This class has 30 inmates. Some are in for financial crimes. Others have histories of exploiting partners. Your story could reach them in ways statistics can't. Candace discussed it with her father and therapist. Greg was skeptical. He doesn't deserve your time. But her therapist asked, would it help your healing to face him, show him and yourself that he didn't break you? Maybe, but I'd do it because if even one person hears my story and chooses not to become Ronald, that's worth it. She agreed to speak. The prison was medium security federal facility, 3 hours from the city. Grey concrete, razor wire, visual markers of consequences. Candace went through security, surrendering phone and personal items. Dr. Mills met her inside. Ronald knows you're coming. He asked if he should recuse himself. I said no. He needs to hear this. The classroom was typical. Desks, whiteboards, fluorescent lights. 30 inmates in prison uniforms stood when Candace entered, and there in the back row was Ronald. He'd aged dramatically. Grey hair, thin, confidence gone completely. He met her eyes briefly, then looked down. Not avoidance, shame. Candace took position at the front and began. My name is Candace Talley. 8 years ago, I married a man I thought I knew. I was wrong. He was having an affair with my best friend, supporting her financially with our money. He manufactured a business crisis to access my family's emergency fund, $90 million. He planned to take that money and flee to Dubai. He almost succeeded. She had their attention. 30 men who'd done similar things, listening to consequences from the victim's perspective. Financial fraud in marriage isn't just about money, it's about trust. When someone lies about finances, they're lying about everything. Every moment becomes questionable. Every "I love you" becomes suspect. Every plan you made becomes a tool they use to manipulate you. She described the discovery process, the documentation, the strategic response. The women they'd helped through the foundation. The copycat cases suggesting Ronald's fraud inspired others. When you commit financial fraud, you're not just hurting your direct victim. You're creating a blueprint others might follow. You're normalizing exploitation. You're making the world less safe for everyone. For an hour, she answered questions. The men asked about warning signs, about how she'd discovered fraud, about what could have stopped Ronald earlier. They were engaged, processing their own behavior through her experience. Finally, a young man raised his hand. Mom, I did something similar. Not as much money. We were just starting out. But I took funds from our joint account, lied about it, hid it. She found out, pressed charges. That's why I'm here. I've been telling myself it wasn't that bad. But listening to you, I think I destroyed her ability to trust anyone. What are you going to do with that understanding? Candace asked. Take real responsibility. Not just say words, but mean them. And when I get out, make sure I never do anything like that again. Maybe help others avoid it. That's all anyone can ask. Not that you erase the past. You can't. But that you become someone who doesn't create new victims. That's rehabilitation. After class, Dr. Mills asked if Candace would speak with Ronald privately. He has something to say. You can refuse. Candace agreed, though uncertain why. They sat in a small conference room, guard outside. Thank you for coming, Ronald said quietly. I know you didn't have to. I didn't do it for you. I know. That's what makes it powerful. He paused. I wanted to tell you something. I've spent 5 years thinking about what I did. Not just to you, to everyone. I destroyed lives for money I didn't need. And the worst part is, I knew what I was doing. It wasn't confusion or desperation. It was greed and contempt for everyone who trusted me. Why are you telling me this? Because I want you to know your foundation matters. The work you're doing, preventing other men from becoming what I was, that's the only good thing that came out of this. And I want you to know that if I ever get out, I'll spend whatever time I have doing similar work, not for redemption, because it's the only thing I can do that means anything. Do you expect me to forgive you? No, I don't forgive me. Why would you? He looked at her directly for the first time. I expect nothing from you, but I wanted you to hear from me that you were right to expose me, right to prosecute me, right to make sure I faced consequences. Everything that happened to me, I earned. Candace sat with that. Do you understand what you destroyed? I'm trying to. I think about it every day. About 8 years you thought you were building a life with someone who loved you, and it was all manipulation. About your father watching his daughter get hurt. About the example I set that others tried to follow. I don't think I can fully understand, but I'm trying. Then keep trying. Keep teaching that class. Keep telling men what exploitation really costs. Will you come back? Speak to future classes? Maybe, if Dr. Mills thinks it's valuable. But Ronald, understand something. I'm not doing this for you. I'm not helping your rehabilitation. I'm preventing future victims. You're just the cautionary tale. I know, and that's what I should be. As Candace left the prison, she felt something shift. Not forgiveness, still too far away, but something like closure. She'd faced Ronald, shown him she wasn't broken, demonstrated his worst act had become her greatest achievement. She returned to the prison 3 more times over 2 years, speaking to different groups. Each time, Ronald sat in the back, taking notes, asking no questions, but clearly absorbing everything. Dr. Mills reported he'd become the program's most effective teacher. He's brutal about his own behavior, doesn't let inmates minimize or excuse, tells them if they've done similar things, they need to face it completely. It's remarkable. Is it genuine? I think so. But here's the thing, it doesn't matter. Either way, he's preventing future crimes. If he's doing it for the right reasons, great. If he's doing it to live with himself, that works too. The outcome matters. In year 7 of his sentence, Ronald became eligible for parole. The prosecutor's office asked if Candace wanted to submit a victim impact statement or appear at the hearing. She thought about it for a week, then decided to submit a written statement, but not appear. Ronald Hayes committed systematic fraud that devastated multiple people and inspired copycat crimes. However, he has also spent 7 years taking genuine responsibility, teaching others to avoid his mistakes, and contributing to fraud prevention education. I believe continued incarceration serves no additional purpose. The question isn't whether he's paid enough. The question is whether releasing him creates more good than keeping him imprisoned. Based on his work with Dr. Mills's program, I believe it does. I neither support nor oppose his release. I simply note that he appears to have become someone who prevents the harm he once caused. That transformation, if genuine, should be acknowledged. The parole board denied his release. Too soon, they said, given the severity of crimes. But they noted the positive programming and educational work. He'd be eligible again in 2 years. Candace didn't follow the hearing closely. Ronald's fate no longer dominated her thoughts. She'd moved on completely, was dating someone new, a teacher named David, who was transparent about everything, who'd shown her his financial records before she asked, who understood why trust had to be rebuilt slowly. David knew her history, had read about the case, and rather than being intimidated, he respected how she'd fought back. "You're the strongest person I've ever met," he told her one evening, "not because of what happened to you, because of what you did after." That felt true. Candace had transformed from victim to survivor to advocate, had built something lasting from wreckage, had helped hundreds of women protect themselves from predators. Ronald's betrayal no longer defined her. It was simply one chapter in a much longer story, a painful chapter that had somehow led to the best chapters of her life. Chapter 10. The Lesson. 8 years after discovering Ronald's betrayal, Candace stood in the grand ballroom of the Riverside Hotel watching the Tally Justice Initiative's annual gala. 500 donors and supporters had gathered to celebrate the foundation's impact. In 8 years, they'd helped over 800 women navigate financial fraud in marriage, provided legal aid to 400 more, trained 200 women in financial literacy skills that changed trajectories. The numbers were impressive, but it was the faces that mattered, women who'd arrived broken and left whole. Greg stood beside her, now 81 but still sharp as ever, watching his daughter command the room. "Speech time," he murmured. "You ready?" "Always." She took the stage to applause, looking out at familiar faces. Victoria Stevens, now remarried and happy. Sarah Chen, still heading the investigation division. Staff members who'd built careers helping survivors. And scattered throughout, women the foundation had helped, now thriving. "Thank you for coming," Candace began. 8 years ago, I discovered betrayal that nearly destroyed me. Tonight, I want to talk about what came after, because the betrayal isn't the end of the story. What comes next, that's what we control. She spoke about the foundation's growth, the lives changed, the systems built to protect women from financial predators, but she also acknowledged the harder truths. "I still have difficult days. I still wonder who I'd be if I'd married someone honest. But I also know I'm stronger now than I ever was. Not because betrayal made me strong, because I chose to become strong after betrayal." She clicked to slides showing the foundation's work. Consultation rooms where women learned to protect assets. Classrooms where financial literacy was taught. Legal offices where fraud cases were built. Safe spaces where survivors became advocates. "Someone asked me recently if I forgive the person who hurt me. The truth is, forgiveness isn't a moment, it's a process. Some days I'm there, some days I'm not, and that's okay. Healing doesn't follow a schedule." She spoke about the broader impact, the Financial Fraud Protection Act, the copycat cases that had been stopped, the systemic changes in how financial fraud was prosecuted. "What I've learned is that the best response to betrayal isn't destruction, it's transformation. Taking the worst thing that happened and making absolutely certain it creates something valuable, something lasting, something that helps people who are where you were." The speech ended to a standing ovation. By night's end, the foundation had raised an additional $15 million, enough to expand to 8 more cities. As the crowd dispersed, Candace found herself alone in a hallway with David. He'd been her partner for 2 years now, patient and transparent and everything Ronald had pretended to be. "I'm proud of you," David said simply. "Not for surviving, for what you built from it. I couldn't have done it without Dad, without Webb and Sarah, without the women who came forward. But you did it. You chose transformation over destruction. That's rare." They drove home together, to the house they'd bought 6 months ago, after long discussions about finances, joint accounts, transparency, everything Ronald had refused to provide. That night, lying in bed, Candace thought about how far she'd come. From the devastated woman who'd discovered a bank statement discrepancy to someone who'd built a national foundation, from victim to survivor to advocate. Ronald had wanted to steal her future and use it to fund his escape. Instead, his betrayal had become the catalyst for protecting thousands of women. His worst act had become her best work. She'd heard through Dr. Mills that Ronald had been denied parole again, but was continuing his educational work. Teaching classes, helping other inmates understand the damage financial fraud caused. Whether it was genuine rehabilitation or self-preservation didn't matter anymore. The outcome was what counted. Candace no longer thought about him often. He'd become simply a chapter in her story, a painful one that had somehow led to everything meaningful after. The foundation would continue long after everyone involved in the original case was gone. The legal protections they'd fought for would protect future generations. The women they'd helped would go on to help others. That was the real lesson. Not that betrayal could be overcome, though it could. Not that justice eventually came, though it did. The real lesson was that the worst things that happened could birth the best things. if you chose purpose over bitterness. Ronald had tried to teach her that she was weak, trusting, easy to manipulate. Instead, he taught her she was strong, strategic, and absolutely capable of turning his destruction into her construction. 8 years later, lying beside someone who treated her with respect and transparency, running a foundation that protected thousands, Candace finally felt what had eluded her for so long: peace. Not because she'd forgiven Ronald, not because the pain had disappeared, but because she'd transformed it into something meaningful. She'd taken the $100 million lesson he'd tried to steal and turned it into the education he never intended, that underestimating women, particularly women with resources and intelligence, was the worst miscalculation a man could make. Ronald had paid for that lesson with 15 years of his life, but the real payment was in what Candace had built, a lasting legacy that would protect women long after his name was forgotten. That felt like victory, complete and absolute. And as she drifted to sleep, Candace realized she'd finally let go of the last weight she'd been carrying. Ronald's betrayal no longer had power over her. It was simply what happened before everything important began. The foundation was her legacy. The women she'd helped were her triumph. The life she'd rebuilt was her revenge, not against Ronald, but against the idea that betrayal had to destroy you. She'd proven it didn't. She'd proven that strength could be built from wreckage, that purpose could emerge from pain, and that the best revenge wasn't destruction at all. It was living well, building well, becoming someone who turned the worst chapter into the catalyst for every good chapter after. Ronald had taught her that lesson without meaning to, and it was the only thank you he'd ever get. Epilogue. 5 years after Ronald's sentencing, Candace stood in the grand ballroom of the Tally Women's Empowerment Foundation, watching 300 women celebrate their graduation from the financial literacy program. Some had escaped abusive marriages armed with hidden documentation and legal representation the foundation provided. Others had rebuilt businesses after divorces that tried to leave them with nothing. Every face told a story of survival, of women who'd learned to protect themselves before the betrayal destroyed them. The foundation had expanded to 12 cities, funded entirely by the careful investments Greg had taught her to make with that $100 million Ronald had tried to steal. Candace had turned his greed into her legacy, his betrayal into other women's salvation. She'd never remarried, never wanted to. She'd built something far more valuable than a relationship. She'd built an empire of protection, education, and power that would outlive her by generations. Ronald had been transferred to a lower security facility after 3 years of model behavior, though he still had a decade remaining on his sentence. She'd heard through Greg that he'd completed his GED and was taking community college courses on financial ethics, the irony apparently lost on him. Pamela had given birth to a daughter in county jail. The child immediately placed with Pamela's elderly mother, who wrote Candace a heartbreaking letter of apology that Candace never answered. Some betrayals carved too deep for forgiveness, and she owed that woman nothing. But standing here tonight, watching women who'd almost lost everything learn to build empires of their own, Candace felt something she'd never expected to feel about that terrible Tuesday evening 5 years ago: gratitude. Ronald's betrayal had revealed exactly who she was capable of becoming. His $100 million scheme had funded the most important work of her life. His destruction had built her into something he could never touch, never diminish, never steal from again. She'd learned the most expensive lesson anyone could teach, and she'd made damn sure every other woman could learn it for free.